Afternoon, everybody. So just right at the top, of course, we welcome the announcement just a little bit ago, I think in the last hour or so, by Qatar, that the humanitarian pause in Gaza, now in its fourth day, will be extended for another 2 days through Thursday morning Israel time. This humanitarian pause has already brought a halt to the fighting, together with a surge of humanitarian assistance. Now, in order to extend the pause, Hamas has committed to releasing another 20 women and children over the next 2 days. We would, of course, hope to see the pause extended further, and that will depend upon Hamas continuing to release hostages. The president has been deeply engaged on this process throughout the Thanksgiving weekend. He spoke with the Emir of Qatar at a very critical moment to help resolve an impasse on the second day of the pause. And then yesterday, he spoke with Prime Minister Netanyahu with a focus on working towards an extension of the pause, the extension that, quite frankly, we're seeing today. His team then worked on that overnight and through the morning. He was briefed this morning by the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, on the ongoing talks to extend the pause. He and his entire national security team will obviously stay engaged on this over the coming days as we work to implement this extension of the original agreement, as well as efforts to extend the pause even from there. Just a quick update on the figures. As of the morning of November 26, 200 trucks were dispatched to the Rafah crossing, and 137 trucks of supplies were offloaded by the United Nations reception point in Gaza, making it the biggest humanitarian convoy received since the 7th of October. This brings the total number of trucks of aid and assistance, including fuel, to over 2,000 since the 21st of October. Our team has prioritized getting this much-needed relief into Gaza to alleviate the suffering of Palestinian civilians there. Of course, most of them have nothing to do with Hamas. And to date, we have assisted over 840 Americans and their families who have departed and sought the support of our team on the ground in Egypt. And with that, we'll take some questions.
Thank you, Admiral. A few things here. The president called conditional aid for Israel a worthwhile thought. Is he actually considering conditioning aid or not?
What he also said, right after acknowledging that it was a worthwhile thought, was that the approach he has chosen to take so far has produced results and outcomes. Many of them I just walked you through in my opening statement. So the approach that we're taking with Israel, and quite frankly with our partners in the region, is working. It's getting aid in to people that need it. It's getting a pause in the fighting. It's getting hostages out. It's getting Americans out. And quite frankly, we continue to urge and will continue to urge the Israelis as they conduct military operations to do so with the utmost care for innocent civilian life.
The Democrats in his party who say we need to start conditioning aid going forward, what would he say then?
I think he would say exactly what he said to y'all yesterday when he got asked this question. It's a worthwhile thought, but the approach that I'm taking now is working. The approach that we're taking now is working. It's getting results.
The increasing dangers to U.S. military personnel in the Gulf. I know you outlined in a series of appearances this morning what happened. But are we to continue seeing this sort of, well, let me put it this way, is that strategy of dealing with it as it happens going to continue to be the strategy? You've seen some say there should perhaps be a more robust response to these ongoing attacks, whether it's from Iranian-backed militias in Syria or Iraq, whether it's the Houthis. Is there any thought of changing up how that's done?
I don't think we're going to get in the business of telegraphing our punches, Ed. We've responded forcefully against the threats to our forces in Iraq and Syria, and now our forces in the Gulf region, the Gulf of Oman, the Gulf of Aden, will continue to do that as appropriate.
Is striking in Yemen still an option?
Again, I'm not going to telegraph punches. We will take the steps appropriate to protect our troops and our forces in the Middle East region. I would add that the Mason is attached to the USS Eisenhower Carrier Strike Group, which the president dispatched to the region specifically to address the increase in the tensions.
Any possibility that Americans will be among the 20 that we release over the next few days?
Well, we certainly hope so. I mean, we're going to watch this very, very closely. We're certainly hoping that another batch of hostages gets released today as part of the fourth and final day of the original agreement. We're going to be watching closely to see if any Americans are in that group. As it has come out over the last 3 days, we don't really know until you get into the end game who's going to be actually on that list. And then even then, you got to watch closely to seeing if who's on the list is folks that actually come out. So we're watching and hoping.
And you spoke of the president's conversation at a critical moment to break that impasse. Can you talk a little more about what that impasse was and how that was broken in his conversations?
I mean, it came down to, you're talking about over the weekend.
Yeah.
It was really more about the lists and who was on it. And I don't want to get into more detail than that. It's a similar issue to what we face today. The reason why there's been a little bit of a delay because there was a difference of a view, if you might, over the list and the fact that mothers were not originally going to be allowed to come out with their children. Now that's been resolved. So it really had to do with the who.
And very, very quickly, the newly elected leader of Argentina says he's coming to the U.S., also to D.C. Any meetings scheduled with administration officials, with the president, with anybody else while he's here?
Yes, President-elect Milei will be coming to Washington, D.C., largely to meet with the IMF and the World Bank over their fiscal and economic issues. But while he's here in town, he'll have a chance to meet with some National Security Council folks, including Jake Sullivan.
No plans to meet with the president, right? Like
No
that.
plans to meet with the president. The president will, as you think you know, be on travel in the middle of the week.
Thank you. On the remaining Americans who are being held, do you have any more clarity on whether they're being held by Hamas or with one of these other terrorist groups?
No.
And, all along you've been very clear about concerns that a broader ceasefire would only benefit Hamas. Sullivan was pretty clear yesterday in saying that, Hamas has been able to gain some benefit from this. How concerned are you that the longer this truce lasts, now 6 days, that Hamas will benefit? And how do you weigh that?
It's a real risk. You have to expect a group like Hamas, a terrorist group, which clearly doesn't abide by laws of war, will try to take advantage of any pause in the fighting for their own benefit. So we're watching that closely, as well as our Israeli counterparts. You can bet that they're watching that closely. And I don't want to speak for the Israelis, but I mean this is a calculated risk that Prime Minister Netanyahu and his war cabinet are willing to take in order to get those hostages out. So it's a balance. And as you've also heard the Israelis say, that once the pauses are over, they intend to go right back at military operations.
And when you say that Hamas has been able to get some benefit so far, is that restocking, resupplying? What does that benefit look like?
I would just say that, without getting into intelligence issues, that any pause in the fighting could benefit your enemy in terms of time to refit, to rest your fighters, to rearm them, re-equip them. A pause in the fighting can be seen as a benefit. But I want to stress, and this was always part of the calculus, any discussion of pauses was always part of the calculus, that Hamas might try to benefit from it. But so too have the Israeli people benefited by the return of their loved ones and hostages. So too have the American people benefited now with little Abigail back with her family. So again, it's a balance. Again, I won't speak for the Israeli Defense Forces, but when these pauses are over, then they have made it very clear that they're going to continue to target Hamas leadership.
John, how many Americans are still being held hostage, and do you have proof of life?
We think the number is, it's less than 10, probably in the neighborhood of, about 8 to 9. But we don't necessarily have firm, solid information on each and every one of them.
And why haven't the two American women who are with Abigail, what happened with them? Why haven't they been released?
Well, we certainly hope that we'll see them in hopefully today. And if not today, certainly over the next couple of days. We want to see them back with their families where they belong as well. The lists are developed by Hamas, and then, of course, the Israelis develop their list of Palestinian prisoners that they're going to release. And we're not involved in the specific drafting of the lists and the determination on Hamas's side of who's going to come out on any given day. Obviously, we want to see those two American women released as soon as possible.
And the truce being extended 2 days, what happens now? Do you want to get like 3 days next, or a permanent truce? What's the thing?
It's like I said in my opening statement, Steve. We're grateful that we've got an extra 2 days to work with here. That'll result in the release of 20 more individuals, women and children. And as I said right at the top, we'd certainly like to see even that extension extended further until all the hostages are released. That's really the goal here: get all the hostages home with their families where they belong, and however long that could take. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Just to follow up on the question about Milei visiting Washington, you mentioned that most of his meetings would be with the IMF, but who will be he meeting at the White House, at the NSC, and what are the expectations of the White House for this meeting? And more broadly, what are the expectations of the president for the relationship between the two nations?
I already answered that question. He'll have a chance to meet with Jake Sullivan and potentially other folks here at the NSC. We'll have to see how that shakes out. President won't unfortunately be able to meet with him because of domestic travel. But obviously, we want to continue to look for ways to cooperate with Argentina. Argentina is a healthy and vibrant partner in this hemisphere on many, many issues. And so we're looking forward to obviously hearing what the president-elect's ideas are and where he wants to go on policy issues and making sure that we have a chance to keep that line of channel communication open.
John, I want to go to Africa and the Congo, if you will. Updates after the visit from DNI head, National Security and State. And also, maybe connecting this with the president's meeting with the president of Angola on trade that deals with the Congo and Zambia. Is that playing a part in also trying to stabilize the frictions there to try to quell all the violence there?
I don't really have an update for you on the Congo, April. The president is looking forward to meeting with the president of Angola later this week on Thursday. There's certainly a wide range of issues to discuss in terms of our bilateral relations and the situation on the continent. I won't get too far ahead of that meeting, but he's looking forward to that. And I will take your question back on specifically on the Congo. I just don't have an update for you.
Well, and specifically on the Congo, because there are a lot of people out here trying to find out what's going on, especially it's one of the worst humanitarian crises that has been reported in Africa and all over the world. People are looking for more information on that one as well, please.
Yeah, no, I understand. Let me take your question. Yeah.
Thank you. John, can you give us a little more details on this upcoming visit of President Lorenzo? Is President Biden excited to receive President Lorenzo, and what more can we expect from this meeting between Joe Biden and President Lorenzo?
Angola is a strategic partner and a growing global voice on issues of peace and security. The President's grateful to Angola for their principled voice in terms of the conflict in Ukraine and the role that President Lourenço is playing to advance solutions to conflicts there as well. Angola and the United States are expanding our economic cooperation at record speed, including pursuing additional investments through the President's flagship Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment to build quality, sustainable infrastructure that helps connect Angola to global markets. So there will be a lot of that on the agenda.
And will the President travel to Africa this year, as he promised during the...
I don't have any travel to speak to today.
Thanks, Alvaro. Just going back to the extension of the truce, is there any chance that it could be further extended, or do you think is it inevitable that hostilities are going to resume? Do you think?
Well, we certainly want to see it extended. As I said right at the opening, we're going to keep working for an extension to the pause again. Absolutely, that's what we want. We want to see all the hostages out, and this is the best way to get them out.
Do you think there's any chance that Israel may decide not to? There's any chance that they may halt the offensive, that they're offensive, or?
The Israelis have been pretty clear that once the pauses are complete and the hostage exchanges are over, that they intend to continue their military operations against Hamas.
John, what has the U.S. learned about how the now returned hostages were treated in captivity?
I don't know that we have a lot of specific information about all of them. Remember, Abigail's the only American citizen of the ones that have been released. I think they're all, the main priority is to get them the medical care that they need. We have to assume that they have medical needs, all of them in some form or fashion. And then getting a chance to get reunited with their families. And then I think at some point, Israeli officials will start to ask them about information about their captivity. But I would leave it to these individuals and the Israeli government to speak to what that looked like. I think it's a safe assumption. I mean, they were taken against their will and in violent circumstances, that this had to have been a harrowing experience for them. We also have to assume that the conditions in which they were being held were obviously less than ideal, given what Hamas has proven capable of doing. But I just don't have a whole lot of specific information on each and every one. I think it's important to also remember that Hamas likely doesn't hold each and every one. And so being held by Hamas, probably they had hostages in more than one location. And there's other groups that may be holding some of these hostages as well, and the conditions could be starkly different. We just don't know enough right now.
And how should we be thinking about the numbers? If the original agreement was for 50 women and children, and now we expect 2 more days, but on certain days they've been releasing more than 10 at a time, so we're up to something like 58.
Well, right. I mean, remember, you had 50 plus coming out was the original deal. It wasn't just, I think it was a little bit more than 50 was they agreed to. And if you got 4 days to do that, you're going to have to do more than 10 per day to do it. And so we're hoping for a list today that will have somewhere in the neighborhood of about 13 is what we're hoping for today. So that's just basic math, trying to do 50 in 4 days. The extension is for an additional 20 over 2 days. And so we'll see how that shakes out.
And then finally, what does the 2-day extension mean for getting more aid into Gaza, and what will the U.S. be able to help facilitate in terms of those 48 hours?
It's a great question. With every single day, and this is the part of this hostage deal that probably doesn't get as much attention as it deserves, it has allowed for a surge of humanitarian assistance into Gaza. I just gave you the numbers today, 200 trucks just today. And that brings, again, since the 21st, it gives a total over 2,000, including fuel. And that's not insignificant. That fuel is now getting in tens of thousands of gallons per day. So another 2 days, I mean, my goodness, that gives you the chance for dozens more trucks and tens of thousands of more gallons of fuel that can get into Gaza to people in need. So we're going to take advantage of every hour of every day that there's a pause to try to help the people of Gaza.
Thanks, John. Can you talk a little bit about how the president's involvement in all this has impacted other priorities? Thinking about COP28, reports that he's not going. Would he have gone had he not been needing to deal with this?
Well, I've seen some press reporting on that. I don't have anything to speak to with respect to travel to COP. Look, yes, the president has been very much focused on the conflict between Israel and Hamas over the last month or so, clearly. I mean, well, more than a month, obviously. And as I said in my opening statement, he was working the phones over the course of Thanksgiving weekend. And I suspect that he'll continue to work the phones in coming days, without question. But at the same time, he's also working across a range of issues. I mean, Karine just laid out for you what he's doing on the economic front here at home. And in the middle of meeting with President Xi in San Francisco, he was also calling the Emir of Qatar and Prime Minister Netanyahu, but didn't stop him from dealing with issues of Indo-Pacific security. He's the commander-in-chief, which means he has global responsibilities, and the president is more than capable of handling them on any given day.
May I also ask how the concerns here domestically, the calls for a ceasefire, the anger about violence, has impacted the president's discussions these last few days, and also like how does he hope and how does the administration hope the pause and the extra trucks that are coming in that you're talking about? Does he hope that will quell some of the anger? Does the administration hope that will quell the anger, ease some of the pain that the country is feeling?
The president understands that there's strong feelings here on multiple sides. He understands that. He respects that. There's strong feelings. He also believes, right down to his core, that the approach we've been taking has been getting results. It has helped enable Israel to deal with what is, quite frankly, a genocidal threat to their existence by Hamas, by giving them some additional security assistance, and, quite frankly, sharing with them our perspectives and advice and counsel on the conduct of military operations, to do so in a way that is as careful and deliberate as possible, obviously with the acknowledgement that these are their operations to plan and execute and speak to. At the same time, he has literally personally led, an incredible surge of humanitarian assistance. No other nation but the United States, and no other leader but Joe Biden, has done as much. Now, I say that with full acknowledgement that we couldn't have done this without the assistance of partners, the Emir of Qatar, Prime Minister Netanyahu, and President Sisi of Egypt, and King Abdullah of Jordan, a lot of help on the ground. I don't mean to discount that, but the president has been in a personal leadership role here in terms of getting humanitarian assistance in. And we have been able to get now much more over the last few days than we were even in the last couple of weeks, as well as the removal of individuals out of Gaza and out of harm's way, 850 Americans, as well as hundreds of others from other countries, and of course all these hostages that we're now seeing. All of that is the result of a lot of personal leadership and involvement and engagement by President Biden, no question about that. I mean, even the Prime Minister's office said as recently as today how critical President Biden's leadership has been. So as long as our approach is getting results, I think you can expect that the president's going to continue to follow that approach.
In his conversations with his counterparts, has the president received any reassurances that the 2 American women will be released today, and if not today, in the next 2 days?
We hope that they will be released today, but we won't know until we see the list and we see who actually comes across. We want to get them released right away.
When do you expect to see the list, and are there any holdups that you are still working through now?
I'm not aware of any other additional holdups now that the one sticking point was whether 2 mothers could come out with their children. It looks like that has been resolved, and they will be. I mean, my goodness, I mean, we're talking about letting little kids go without their moms. So that got resolved, and that's a good thing. But again, we'll have to see. We won't really know who comes out, regardless of the list itself, until you actually get them on the other side, on the receiving end, and can identify them and know, in fact, that who you have is who you thought you would have.
Do you have any information on the conditions of the other American hostages?
No, I think Steve asked that question. I don't have any more information.
And lastly, have negotiations started about the next phase of the release, and that would include men?
Well, right now, we're focused on this extension here for 20 more hostages over the course of 2 days. And as I said in my opening statement, that extension applies only to women and children. So we're going to focus this a piece at a time. We're glad that we got to day 4 here. We won't breathe a sigh of relief until we know we've got today's hostages out. And the team is already working, our team working with our partners in the region, already working on this 2-day extension for 20 more. And as I said at the top, if we could extend that, we'll want to see it keep extending until we can get all the hostages out.
Thank you. Admiral, we're seeing that Saudi Arabia is pressuring other OPEC Plus members to reinstate those oil supply cuts. Wondering what your level of concern is and what you see as the impact on inflation in the U.S.
Well, I think I'll let OPEC leaders talk to their plans. As far as I know, there's been no announcements here of any production cuts, so we'll let them speak to that. The president's going to keep focusing, as he has been, on a healthy global market that's properly balanced and that can continue to bring the price of gasoline down here in the United States.
Thank you so much, John. CENTCOM is reporting that the carrier strike group Eisenhower has entered the Arabian Gulf. What message is Washington trying to send to Tehran with this? Does this mean that they're not heeding the call to not widen the conflict?
The great thing about aircraft carriers is they can move around pretty easily, and we move them around as needed to demonstrate our commitment to our national security interest in the region. Look, the message of the Ike and the message of the Ford, the message of the additional aircraft squadrons that we send into the region and the air and missile defense assets, all of that is one to any actor in the region, be it a nation state or otherwise, that this is not a time to try to take advantage of the conflict between Israel and Hamas and escalate or deepen this conflict, make it worse. That's the message that we're sending.
Is this targeted at Iran?
It's targeted at any actor in the region, nation state or otherwise, that might have considerations of widening this conflict.
Thanks a lot, Karine. John, in your statement at the top, you thanked the government of Qatar for this 2-day pause that has been reached. What level of involvement was the U.S. government in securing this agreement?
Very much so. I also mentioned in my opening statement, President Biden has been personally involved in getting the original deal in place and loosening up a snag that happened over the weekend, as well as working with partners, Qatar and Israel specifically, in the last 24 to 48 hours to get this extension announced.
Congress comes back tomorrow. What's the priority level for securing those aid packages for both Israel and Ukraine?
Very, very high, John. I mean, we desperately need the supplemental funding that the president asked for. And I would remind members of Congress as they come back to work that the figures in that supplemental request are well informed by our Ukrainian partners and our Israeli partners. We didn't just pull those figures out of thin air. It was very much in keeping with what our partners have told us they need for the coming months. And in both cases, the runway keeps getting shorter and shorter. You've seen that in the case of Ukraine, the drawdown packages that we've been providing are now at smaller increments in terms of how much money is being allocated, because we just don't have the flexibility that we once had in terms of the amount of aid that can be given in each and every package. And look, we're in a critical time here. Winter months are upon us. They're upon the Ukrainian army particularly, and it's going to be tougher and tougher for them to conduct operations when the weather gets less conducive to do so. So we hope that when Congress comes back to work, that they'll act with the same sense of alacrity that we've been trying to act in terms of getting that supplemental through.
There was reports saying that the president said that he's sorry and he's disappointed in himself after meeting with the Muslim leaders. Do you think that the president could have done more to show sympathy towards Palestinian civilians or being seen as even-handed?
I'm not going to discuss reports of private meetings. As I said earlier, the president understands there's strong feelings here on all sides. And as he's also said publicly, he doesn't want to see any more innocent civilians killed or wounded as a result of the fighting in Gaza. Not one. I mean, the right number of civilian casualties is 0. We understand there have been many, many thousands of them. And we understand that with each and every one of those data points as a grieving family, the president understands that. And that's why we're going to continue to urge our Israeli counterparts as they go back, they plan to go back to military operations, that they do it in the most discreet, deliberate, careful, cautious way possible.
The aim of this war by the Israelis is to destroy Hamas and to kill its leaders. One of its leaders is Yahya Sinwar. He's the guy who signs on the hostage deal.
Yeah, I know he is.
Can you explain this complexity of, on one hand, Israel wanted him dead, but at the same time, he's the one who decides how many hostages are going to be released. I mean, just help us to understand how complex is that, and is this a way to? Is this like a strategy to keep from Hamas to keep on releasing less hostages on the hope that he won't be targeted or will be?
You're asking me to kind of get into the psychology of Hamas, and I'm just not going to do that. What I can tell you is that the Israelis have a right and a responsibility to go after this threat posed by Hamas, and certainly as a part of doing that, to go after their leadership, which they have done. And they have talked about the leadership that they have been able to take off the battlefield of Hamas. It's a strategy that we executed ourselves against ISIS and against Al-Qaeda. There's a logic to going after the leadership of a network. But in the meantime, there are Hamas political leaders that Qatar has connections with and communications with that they are working with to secure the release of these hostages.
Last question. Thanks, Corinne. Just to follow up on the worthwhile thought remark that the president made, I understand he also said he's standing by his approach, but was he saying that he's open to conditioning aid in the future as well, given that this is something he described in that way?
I'm not going to get ahead of the president on this. I think he was very clear. Yes, it's a worthwhile fight. He acknowledged that. But he also said, in the same breath, that the approach that we've been taking thus far has produced outcomes and results that have not only benefited the Israeli people in terms of their security, but the people of Gaza in terms of humanitarian assistance and the release of so many Americans now just to walk out through the Rafah crossing. So we're going to keep working on those approaches, on results-based approaches.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you.
Quick question.